Hey, what's up everyone? Gareth here with FCP Euro. Welcome back to another engine teardown. We have this M54 B30 on the engine stand. This actually belongs to Steven Coppola, who is usually the man editing the videos that you watch, but this happens to be from his Spec E46. Steven, tell me the history of this engine and why it's on the stand today.
So we are exploring what caused this engine to fail. The history of this engine is that it was a junkyard engine. We put it in for our 14-hour race back in November, and it grenaded. So we're not exactly sure why, but as soon as we got back from the race, Corey and I put it up on the lift, and we pulled the engine and discovered some fun things. So you're in for a treat.
Oh, what? What is that? I've never seen that. I've never actually seen the connecting rod fail like that. Here's Johnny.
All right, so before we get too far, I actually want you to take a look at some of the damage. And the most obvious is the two holes on either side of the engine. There is one right here, which is giant, right underneath the starter.
All right, so that is the connecting rod right there.
Yeah, and normally what happens is it breaks. This one is intact, so that's the first odd thing that we noticed. There's also no piston left. When we pulled the engine, we actually found chunks of the piston skirt, and the piston itself actually like exploded. There's also a window through the block in that cylinder, and you can see right through. So it blew out the other side.
The starter took a hit. That's not going to be a good useful core for somebody one day.
Yeah,
that's going to be rejected as a core return. So the other hole, the smaller one on the exhaust side, I can see the bottom part of the connecting rod, and the big half, or the big end, you can see, but also right here, here's the small end of the connecting rod, or part of it, with the connecting rod bolt still in it. I can see the wrist pin on the, oh wow.
There's more.
This thing itself up perfectly. I've never actually seen a connecting rod fail like that.
There's actually more. So why don't you come to the front of the engine and take a look at this.
The front?
Yeah, the front. So right down here, we noticed there is what appears to be something trying to work its way through the front of the oil pan. Along with the crack. Now, there is, the oil pump actually sits right here in the sump.
Is that that could be the shaft for the oil pump?
It could be the shaft for the oil pump. Now, I do have the upgraded oil pump in here that has 4 bolts that hold on the pulley instead of just the one that are known to back out. That doesn't mean that the shaft itself couldn't have broken, even though it's supposed to be an upgraded shaft to prevent that from happening. So we had a situation during the race where a failed support rod on the transmission caused a money shift. So I do have some ideas as to what might have caused the damage, but really we just got to tear it apart and find out. So where do you want to start? I mean, we can start with accessories, we can start with intake manifold. What do you think?
I think we should start with the accessories and the intake manifold and get just down to the block.
All right.
And then we'll go from there.
All right, sounds good.
The first place to investigate whenever there is a failure like this is the oil filter. Hoping some answers will be trapped in the pleats, the guys started there.
We're going to pull the oil filter first, and we're going to see if the oil filter is full of debris, you know, basically bearing particles, etc., because that would tell us if the engine was dying before it blew itself apart. Oh yeah, got a bunch of junk in the oil filter. So this thing might have been eating itself before it failed. Here's what we know. We got metal shavings and coppery looking bits inside the oil filter. We got a giant window in the block on both sides. We have
cracked oil pan and
whatever's happening
whatever
there.
that is.
Never seen that before. And a piston that has left the chat with a money shift. Maybe it dropped a valve and it just went from there. I don't know.
Yeah.
We're gonna get into it. We're gonna see. But this is already looking pretty interesting. We'll leave it at that.
All right. So let's tear the accessories off and let's get into it.
The cause lying deep in the engine, everything has to come off. Accessories, intake manifold, and any other ancillaries that will make it easier to later remove the cylinder head.
So yeah, BMW decided to help everybody out on water pump removal for M50, M52, M54, M56, S52. All you have to do is just thread in 2 M6 bolts into the housing that's already pre-threaded. So just find long enough bolts and just thread them in. and it'll conveniently start to pull the water pump off. Seal with an O-ring, so sometimes the O-ring can be kind of stubborn. So instead of fighting it, you know, just use what was provided for you. And you actually can start to see it start to pull itself off. So I see a lot of people struggle to get these pumps off. There's no need for it. Also worth noting, because this is Spec E46 car, it uses the M52 exhaust manifolds. They're modified, but they don't use the traditional M54 manifolds. So if you saw the manifolds and you're like, those look different, it's because of that. All right, so while Steven's pulling off the exhaust manifold for bank 2, you're gonna see if it dropped a valve on the exhaust side. If the valve is there, the mystery thickens. Valve stem is still there, so it didn't drop a valve. Doesn't mean that the valves didn't kiss some piston. So we're gonna go ahead and pull spark plug on cylinder 5 because that's what blew up.
It could potentially be really bad or surprisingly good. So far we've been surprised by a lot of things.
What the?
Again, this makes no sense.
So, yeah, normally if you know, the piston had come up and smashed the cylinder head, everything would be just absolutely mashed at the spark plug tip, and that looks perfect. You can go ahead and put this in another car and run another day.
There's a little side-by-side comparison for
so
you.
There's oil on this one from oil just getting blown up through the crankcase, but yeah, that spark plug is perfectly fine. Usually when you see catastrophic failure like this, you would expect for the spark plug to be completely destroyed and mashed, and it's not. What's more interesting is the piston in cylinder 5 is actually still in there. So it's like the bottom part came apart, but the actual piston itself is still lodged in the bore. So at this point, we're gonna pull the valve cover, start getting the cylinder head off, and we're gonna find what other strange mysteries that this engine has for us.
Nothing about this is making any sense. What you would typically find in a failure like this just isn't present. The only option is to keep going deeper, which means the removal of the cylinder head.
Okay, yeah, so this is a mechanical tensioner, it has a spring in it. It does use some oil pressure, but it's the spring on the inside that creates the tension for the main guide rail over here. But you could put an S54 timing chain tensioner, which would have a hydraulic element in it instead of this mechanical element. And there's our Vanos unit. So obviously M54 is dual Vanos, and everything is oil actuated, so 2 different solenoids. This is sort of sometimes these stick in, but these are helical, and this pushes on these little plungers, which will either advance or retard the cam.
All right, G, next steps.
Well, we'll get our cam chain tensioner out.
Okay.
Which this is hydraulic, so we're gonna have to push that down and it'll squirt some oil. We'll have to get our reluctor ring off here. We don't need to remove the cams, but we do need to remove the chains in the front and the rest of the Vanos related stuff. We can let this chain drop down in the block, but past that we don't really need to do much more than that. So yeah, this way that the Vanos on this car works is you have all this helical cut gear. As this moves in, it'll rotate this sprocket, and then on the backside you have helical cut splines on the inside, which interfaces with this gear on the cam. So as this moves in and out, it'll either advance the cam or it'll allow the cam to retard relative to the crank. So it's all hydraulic through engine oil pressure, but this is all actuated via the Vanos unit. So pretty simple. And for what it's worth, you don't need to take the cam trays out to remove the cylinder head. In fact, you don't even need to take the cams out. We're doing that because we want to see what the rest of the condition is. If there was signs of oil starve, you would see it on the cams as well. What we want to do is I want to get the pistons towards the bottom, so kind of like midway down the bore.
Okay.
So I want to get these fairly close where they're all even. It's further down. This one was there. Starts going down. This one is going to be all the way down. Okay, so that gives us room to rotate the cam over by hand. What we need to do is rotate the cam over So that lobes on this, you want 2 that are pointing down, and then you can release the caps.
Okay.
And then you can slowly release the caps on the ones that are pointing down. Otherwise, the old cam might explode. We don't want that. Just move the cam so that the E2 cap and the E6 cap, the lobes on the cam are pointing mostly down. This will allow Steven to remove cap E1, E3, E4, E5, and E7. And then we'll have to slowly release pressure on E6 and E2. These cams are hollow, so if there's any kind of tension, it could cause the cam to explode. So yeah, Steven's undoing these nuts a quarter turn at a time to slowly take the tension off the cam. You know, we have the lobes here on cylinder 1 pointing straight down, but this way it sort of evenly distributes the load across the entire cam. Like I said, these cams are hollow, so if you were just to undo it unevenly, you could cause the cam to break. All right, we're doing the exact same thing on the exhaust cam, so just rotate it over so that number 1 and number 4 are pointing down on the lobes. The rest have no load on them whatsoever, so we can go ahead and remove those caps immediately. Again, we'll be interested to see what these look like. You know, the cam caps are labeled A1 through A7 and E1 through E7. You take these caps off, it's very important to put them back in the same place if you're reusing the cylinder head, because these are line honed. E is for intake, not exhaust. A is for exhaust. This is in German, not English, so don't mix those two up. You're gonna have a problem if you do. Now the nice thing is, if you happen to find that your cam tray and your cam is completely wiped away, but the rest of the cylinder head is good, the cam trays are a separate part. So you can get new cam trays, you get new cams, swap cams, take different cam trays from different engines, none of that really matters. So, you know, you can construct a whole new thing. If there was signs of oil starve, you would see it on the cams as well, which we don't. So we know whatever this condition was that caused this engine to fail, it wasn't a long-term oil starvation problem. This is something that happened pretty instantly, I think, at this point.
Yeah, I think it's pretty safe to say that whatever the root cause was, it was instantaneous and catastrophic.
Yes. So yeah, we can actually just go ahead and pull the cylinder head at this point. So I think those are going to be E12s, and then also in the front here we have some small ones that most people will miss, and then you'll get confused why it's not coming off. Those go into the timing cover. We got 14 main head bolts. You want to start from the inside and work your way out spirally. So Steve will start here, go here, 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 etc., etc. You want to go ahead and lift it up evenly, and then also here in the front you have these tiny little bolts that go directly into the timing cover. A lot of people will miss these and then wonder why the head will not come off. Also not uncommon for the M54 aluminum blocks to pull the threads with the head bolts. Pretty much a one-time installation. You will probably have to heel the coil of the block.
Ready?
A little dribble. Ooh.
All right, so G, this is the cylinder in question. There's real clear evidence of valve to piston contact.
Oh yeah. But the question is, did that happen first because of the over rev?
Right.
Or did that happen after the piston let go of the connecting rod? Yeah, at this point, I think we're gonna flip it over, take the oil pan off, and see what kind of fun we find underneath.
With the discovery of valve damage, the pieces are starting to come together, but there are still a lot of unanswered questions. Time to remove the oil pan and get to the bottom of what appears to be milling its way through the front of the pan.
We're gonna divide and conquer. I'm gonna take the timing cover. Steven's gonna do the oil pan. I think we're gonna find some interesting stuff in here.
Yeah, ultimately this will really tell us what actually happened.
Yes.
And I'm actually pretty excited.
All right, let's do it. I gotta take these bolts out here because these go into the timing cover. Oh. Well, that was.
Oh.
Found where that came from. So this is a modified oil pump. For those of you who know, the oil pump nuts on these engines are known to back off, and that's because there's no tensioner on the oil pump chain. It looks like the center bolt that mounts the sprocket has backed out and started drilling itself through the oil pan. So,
all right, G, moment of truth.
Yeah.
Let's get this off and hopefully get it off and see if we can.
we'll give it a couple. Oh, actually, it's going to come off. There's a washer that just fell out.
Oh boy. Well, there's certainly a lot of debris in this, as you
We got
would
little
expect.
McNuggets. We got little Crispies.
We do have
We
little.
got stuff and things. So actually, the good news is the modified oil pump
Did exactly what it was supposed
did
to
what it
do.
was supposed to do. Granted, that center bolt came out and started drilling through the oil pan.
Yeah, that's a problem. Yeah, so typically what happens with these oil pumps is there's a single nut that bolts this sprocket onto the shaft, and that nut will actually back off, resulting in this entire sprocket working its way off and subsequently losing oil pressure instantly. This particular setup is a 4-bolt, so the bolt goes through to the main shaft, and then these 3 additional bolts bolt the sprocket onto a flange, thus creating a scenario where it can't fall off. And this is actually a perfect example of why that's important.
And one thing on these engines compared to the Euro S50 or the S54, the Euro S50 and S54, they use a very similar oil pump timing chain arrangement. They have an actual tensioner that pushes on this chain. So you can see the amount of slack that's here, that's normal. We're talking high engine speeds, lots of gear shifting. This chain is going nuts the whole time. Now granted, that nut is reverse threaded, so it's not supposed to come loose. But this slack on the chain basically acts like an impact gun on that nut and could cause it to come loose. So this modification is intended to prevent that from ever being a problem.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but can't you fit
Yes,
a S54 tensioner onto this engine?
you can. You have to drill holes into the block and then put dowels in, but there's also some other options out there for adding a tensioner. So that's like a nice added redundancy.
Yeah. All right, so next up, oil pump.
Oil pump and,
Comes out,
yep, and
windage
the windage tray.
Pickup tube, everything, so we can get a good look at the bottom of this engine.
Yep. Oil pump looks like it's okay.
Yeah, oil pump looks fine.
We can go ahead and remove. There it is.
Aw.
There's the rest of number 5. What's left of the piston.
So literally it just exploded where the wrist pin connects to it.
Which is a weak point on a lot of
It
stock
is.
pistons.
I mean, it's not surprising that that happened.
All right, let's see if we can find any signs of oil starvation on any of the other cylinders. I was trying to figure out what this was before. This piece right here.
Yeah.
That is what's left of the oil squirter.
Okay. That makes sense.
So this is an oil galley right here. And that is the oil squirter for cylinder 5. And it is now lodged into the block.
All right, so we're over at the table. We've taken the engine off the stand because we are now going to remove the crank. It's sort of the last potential piece that could give us some answers as to what caused the failure. We haven't really come across any smoking guns. There's been some surprises, but nothing that has really been like, oh, that's the problem. So
Yep.
what are we looking for here?
I think at this point, we obviously have an extremely damaged oil squirter, but of course, the block where that oil squirter sits
Right.
is no moss. But also, I've noticed, even with the connecting rods removed and the pistons removed, it takes quite a bit to get this thing to rotate. So if you want to hold the block down,
Yep.
I mean, there's some stiction there, and there shouldn't be.
Yeah, once it gets going, it spins relatively free, but it should not take that much force to start.
And won't move again. So I think we're going to find something on the mains, potentially. Or there's just debris wedged
Yeah.
in here. This thing took a hit where the thrust bearing is, so that could be part of the problem.
I also noticed that even though our damage is concentrated to cylinder 5,
Yeah.
there was some damage, it looks like, to the crank in cylinder 4 as well. So, I mean, really, we won't know any definitive answers until we get it out.
The only thing that I can tell right now is I don't feel any kind of end play in the crank. So obviously the thrust bearings, there is a little bit of side to side. Without a dial indicator on this, it's impossible to really tell for sure, but you know, who knows when this thing let go, what we're feeling with in terms of how the crank rotates could just be the result of the fact that this thing imploded. So we're gonna get the crank out, we're gonna look at what the main bearings look like, look at what the crank journals look like.
With only a few potential causes left, the crank has to come out to be sure. Unsurprisingly, there was clear evidence of heat soak on the bearing journal of cylinder 5. With only a small heat affected zone, this indicates that the failure happened very quickly and not over a long period of time.
Every single crankshaft will have a thrust bearing or thrust washers. Now, in the case of the M54, the thrust bearing has your main bearing, and then it also has the thrust washer built in. And you can see like this wear here, and then also there's wear on the backside. On an automatic transmission car, this doesn't really apply, but manual transmission specifically, when you push in the clutch, it actually forces the crank to move forward in the block. And then what will happen is when you come off the clutch, it'll move back. But the crank has to have some ability to move side to side because you have forces that are pushing directly down on the crank, so that would be the pistons. And then that's being translated into motion or rotational motion this way, so you have basically this force moving 90 degrees. You have to have some way to keep the crank supported, so you have these thrust washers in there. Manual transmissions wear out the thrust washer faster just because obviously you're on and off the clutch. Now, if you ride the clutch a lot, you might see these thrust bearings really wear out. So you're at a stoplight, you just keep your foot on the clutch instead of putting the car in neutral. The only thing I see on this is I can feel whatever happened there. This is probably the worst main bearing. Now I'm kind of curious. Now it moves freely, but also this thrust bearing and this number 6 cap was extremely difficult to get out. So I'm looking at the journal and I don't see anything that stands out as obvious, but
now one thing that I do find very curious, this bearing journal compared to any of the other ones, you can tell how hot it got.
Yep.
You know, this backside here is almost black, whereas
everything else
has that nice chrome sheen that you're accustomed to seeing.
Yep. It does. And right here is what is left of the oil squirter. No matter what, it took a hit. The question is, did it happen before or after? One thing that you'll notice is the tips point up, and they're supposed to be spraying oil at the bottom of the pistons to keep it cool. It's not unheard of for an over-rev situation to cause contact. And the more that we look at this, we don't see clear signs of oil starvation over a period of time because you would see the same type of damage all the way across. The rod bearings looked totally fine. I think what we really have that happen here is the oil squirter probably took a hit, was not spraying oil or not spraying oil where it needed to.
So you can see how thin this tube is. Very susceptible to breaking off should there be any sort of contact made with it.
Yeah, so if the piston made contact with the oil squirter, just, because of an over rev or something like that, it's possible that the piston could have overheated, could have failed. Also, the wrist pin, which is a pivot point for the piston, that could have seized up, which caused catastrophic failure. Everything seemed to fail around where the wrist pin would be. And then obviously once the wrist pin fell away from the piston, the connecting rod just did its thing.
Yep.
I think unfortunately cylinder number 5 was a victim of the over rev. So one simple over rev caused all that damage.
All right, G, so we just wrapped up pulling this engine apart, and at least we found something that we think caused the failure. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is.
I think it's pretty obvious that this engine was not really all that well taken care of. I mean, it did have 160,000 miles on it, came out of a scrapyard as a $500 used engine. So you kind of get what you get. Probably didn't get the best oil change intervals throughout its life, but I don't think that's what killed it. I just think in this case, the money shift damaged the oil squirter, and then it did run for a period of time after that, but this was probably a slow failure over a period of time. And when it finally had enough, it finally had enough, and obviously it went to the block. It happens. These things break.
Yep. And if you want to learn more about what a money shift is, we actually did a whole video explaining exactly what that was. So we'll put a link in the description below. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up, subscribe as always. We're making new content all the time, and we appreciate you watching.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you for the next one.